On this episode of the CJ Sweat Show, we're going to discuss why the Clemson Tigers were robbed by the college football playoff. We will also discuss the Oklahoma Sooners have a big problem, and it's not Baker Mayfield. We've got the NFL playoff predictions coming up. LeBron James said something very interesting today. We've got a lot of things to get to, and we start right now. I'm not bringing the bias here. You are.
What they do up there? Brainwash them?
Hey, it's not my fault that your team is terrible.
Let me speak. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
This is just honest. I'm sorry if it hurts. Oh wait, I'm not really sorry.
Put that coffee down. You can't stop!
Can't stop, won't stop. What a big set.
This is the CJ Sweat Show. We are now live and brought to you out of Roanoke, Virginia. Thank you all for joining us on this frigid Wednesday evening. I saw somewhere today that it is lower than 32 degrees in every state of the country besides California and Florida. It's cold here, I can tell you that. I think when we pulled in, it was about 15 degrees outside. That's cold for me. Chris, how are you this evening?
I'm chilling.
What's that?
I'm chilling.
Chilling? Literally?
Yeah, it's cold.
Yeah, it's cold. I don't mind the cold so much if there's like snow on the ground. But I cannot take frigid and no snow. So I'm jealous of my friends in South Carolina and Georgia. If you are listening or watching while you enjoy the snow down there, thank you for making us a part of your evening. So a lot of good things happened over the weekend. We had a lot of fun bowl games. We really did. That Penn State game was absolutely a thriller. We had one really good college football playoff game between Oklahoma and Georgia. Loved watching that one. And again, Duke won their bowl game. So this has been, a great bowl season for me. But I want to get to that Oklahoma-Georgia game, because something very interesting happened during that game. And if you're an Oklahoma fan, you should be concerned. Lincoln Riley, the coach of the Oklahoma Sooners, he's been there now not even a year. He took over for Bob Stoops back in the summer. That team was absolutely good enough to win that game Saturday. Not only were they good enough, that team should have won that game Saturday, and that team should be playing this weekend against Alabama, and they should have beaten Alabama this coming up weekend in the national championship. That's how talented they are. But why is Oklahoma going to be watching the game from their house this weekend rather than playing in the game? Because Lincoln Riley coached this weekend in a way of not to lose. You ever hear that? Like they're playing not to lose the game. Basically means they're playing super conservative. They don't want to give up a big play. So they play super conservative to avoid losing the game. You ever hear that term, playing not to lose? What it really means is you're playing too scared to win. You're too scared to take the opportunities being presented to you. You're too scared to play to the level you need to play at to win the game. So instead of doing what you need to do to win, you do everything in your mind not to lose. And that always results in you losing the game. That never pans out. Okay, so we're closing in on the end of the first half of the game. Oklahoma just scored. They kicked an onside kick, or they kicked a squib kick to prevent Georgia from returning the kickoff for a touchdown. So Georgia this year has not done that one time. Oklahoma this year has not allowed that one time. Historically, Georgia doesn't do that, and historically, Oklahoma doesn't allow kickoffs to be returned all the way to the end zone. Yet Lincoln Riley, instead of coaching from experience, instead of coaching from scouting, from film, from the different things you should be paying attention to during the game, Lincoln Riley coached by the book, which says kick a squib kick down the middle of the field. So what happened? Georgia got the ball, went down the field, and hit a field goal to cut the lead down to 14 points. Chris, have you ever played blackjack?
Yeah, a couple times.
Okay, so I love blackjack. In blackjack, there's called basic strategy, which is basically stay if you see like a 6 from the dealer, hit if you see jack from the dealer because they probably have 20 and you're trying to get over. Stay if you've got 20, hit if you're under 12, different things like that, right?
Okay.
But there are times in blackjack where it is smart to get off of the rules, to do what we call playing the hand off script, right? For example, you're at a table with 5 others. You see one guy at the table's got 2 queens, another guy at the table's got a jack and a king, another guy at the table's got a jack and an ace, and then the dealer's also showing you a jack. So if you've got a 5 and a 10, basic strategy says you should stay. But in this scenario, I would say hit because you likely aren't going to be hit with the face card. So you likely are going to get something a little bit lower because everything on the table is higher, right?
Yeah, I see where you're going.
So there's instances where if you observe everything on the table, you are supposed to get away from the book. But it takes somebody who's played blackjack a few times to know when you go off script. You can't study basic strategy and know when to do that. It takes a coach with experience. He has to have experience to know when do you go off of the book. When you're up 17 points and your defense is awful and your special teams has been good, that's when you go off book. We've known this now all year long, that Oklahoma's biggest weakness, we said it last week during the podcast, is their secondary. So what's the last thing you want to do? Put your secondary against their offense with the play on the line at the end of the first half. That's exactly what he did. Now we get into overtime. And I'm watching this game, we're in overtime. Oklahoma chose to play defense to start off overtime. Why would you do that in college football? Why would you choose to play defense?
In overtime?
In overtime.
Oh, because you want to know what you're going to do in the next series when you get the ball.
The goal is if you can play defense in overtime, that means when you get the ball, hopefully a touchdown means you can win the game.
Yeah, you know what you have to do.
Right. So they hold Georgia to a field goal, meaning you've got the scenario you wanted. You now can win the game with a touchdown. 4th and inches to go. You have the Heisman candidate on your team. The Heisman candidate, Baker Mayfield. And don't get me wrong, I don't think Baker's going to work in the NFL. But Baker is a heck of a college quarterback. I mean, Baker is, some of the stuff he can do in college is absolutely amazing. He can extend the pocket. He's aggressive. He reads the ball downfield. But instead of giving it to Baker, who is like 95% of the reason you're even in this game to begin with, what do? Got to go by the book and got to kick that field goal and tie the game up. So you didn't want to win it then. All you cared about was, let's see how much longer we can get this going. And the more you did that, the more chances you gave Georgia to win the game. And that's why Georgia beat you. Baker Mayfield is going to leave Oklahoma at the end of this year. Lincoln Riley is going to remain your coach. Friends, if you're an Oklahoma fan, I got news for you. That ain't good. Now, you can go and fire Mike Stoops. You can get all upset about him and being the coordinator of that defense. Totally get that. But Lincoln Riley's your head man. And Lincoln Riley is the one who said we're not going to go for it on 4th down. And Lincoln Riley is the one who said we're going to kick a squib kick to end the second quarter. And Lincoln Riley is the one who let that comeback by Georgia happen. You gave Georgia hope. Anytime somebody starts digging their own hole and it's your enemy, your opponent, and you give them a little bit of rope, if they're talented, expect them to use that rope. Georgia did, and that's why Georgia's going to be playing this weekend in the on Monday in the championship against Alabama. And Oklahoma's going to be watching. Here's the other thing I heard this past weekend is that I heard this from two sides. I heard people tell me, I heard SEC fans tell me, oh, we're the best conference because we got the 2 teams in the national title. They're both from the SEC, so we're the best. And then I heard Big Ten fans say, well, look at our bowl record. We went 8-1, excluding Michigan's crumble to South Carolina, where they completely fell apart. We went 8-1, so we're the deepest, and we had the best record against non-conference opponents, so we're the best. Chris, at the start of the year, did we not all say the SEC has 1, maybe 2 good teams, and the Big Ten had a couple of really good teams, but for the better part was more deep than top-heavy?
I didn't say that.
I said that.
I've been saying the SEC was the best conference in college football all year.
I don't think they're the best. I don't think the Big Ten's the best. Look, the SEC cannot be the best conference in college football because the second you get past Georgia, it's completely miserable. And keep in mind that
true.
Auburn, who beat Georgia and Alabama, just lost to Central Florida, a game in Atlanta, which, if you're not familiar with the area, super close to Auburn. Auburn lost that game to Central Florida, a team that doesn't have nearly the amount of talent you do, a team that shouldn't be as well coached as you are, a team that shouldn't win that level of a game. You lost that one. The rest of your conference was absolutely abysmal in these bowl games. You ended up going under 500.
That happens every year, and I told you that at the beginning of the year.
But this is what I'm saying. It's not that the SEC is worse or better than the Big Ten, and it's not that the Big Ten's better or worse than the SEC. They're both just as good. They're just completely different conferences. The SEC has Georgia and it has Alabama. And then you have Auburn, who's good, not great, as has been evidenced from that game this past weekend. And then outside of that, you got nothing. You got absolutely nothing.
South Carolina was a good team. Beat Michigan in their bowl game.
They should have beaten Michigan. Michigan was a super young team. This is my other argument I'm going to get into.
Mississippi State was a good team. LSU was a good team. So all those are good teams.
LSU would not hold their own against. I would not put LSU up against Penn State. I wouldn't put LSU up against Ohio State. Who LSU play Wisconsin in their bowl game?
That's a great
No, Wisconsin played Miami.
Oh, they lost to Notre Dame.
Lost to Notre Dame. Yeah, that Notre Dame team is not a great team. That Notre Dame team has fewer scholarships. They don't have the same caliber of athletes. LSU should have smoked Notre Dame, and they didn't. What we have in the Big Ten is we have better coaching. By far better coaching in the Big Ten. What we have in the SEC is we have better athletes. By far better athletes. So this idea that one conference is better than the other, just stop. It's even. The other thing I heard is that Jim Harbaugh is in over his head at Michigan. You've absolutely got to be kidding me. We told you, both Chris and I told you at the start of the year, Michigan would be fun, but not very good, and they would struggle against senior teams, against experienced teams. While they played South Carolina, an experienced team. Michigan only returned 7 starters from last season. That is, according to every college football expert you can go read, listen to, watch, whatever, returning starters is the single most important thing a college football team can have. Michigan only had 7. So, of course, they went 8-5 and lost their bowl game. That Michigan team, though, next year and the year after, is going to be in the top 2 in the Big Ten, and they're going to blow out teams like Wisconsin, like Iowa. They've got an entire offseason to go back and game plan, and they've got all of the same guys coming back. Michigan will be just fine. There's absolutely nothing to worry about with them. Ever hear that, what was that coach who said, they are who we thought they were? It's the same thing with Michigan. They are who we said they were. They are good, fun, not great, not elite, can't beat the top 5 teams. But they will. They will. It's just a young team. All right, so, we talked about the Oklahoma-Georgia game, but I'm going to throw something out there. Clemson was cheated out of their game with Alabama. There was absolutely no reason for them to lose that game, and the only reason they did is because the current playoff format sucks. And that's why Clemson lost. We're going to get to that and more on the other side of this break. This is the CJ Sweat Show. We'll be right back.
There's nothing left to say. I know where I'm going. We're starting here today. And you know that right. You know that's right.
Hey, it's your favorite redhead, CJ. I'm sure by now you've heard my opening rant, CJ Thoughts. Well, let me give you my thoughts on the car buying process. If you're like me, when you go to buy a car, you just want to find something reliable with decent payments. I'm not talking about going to the local guy down the street looking to make a quick sell. Buyers Auto has been around for over 100 years. and they're going to take time to ensure you're buying a car specifically fit for your needs. That's why I'll trust Buyers Auto with the purchase of my next car. Buy your auto from Buyers Auto. Back here at the CJ Sweat Show. By the way, this is a complete side note, has nothing to do with sports. Saw Star Wars last night, The Last Jedi. I actually really liked it, and I hate sci-fi movies. I mean, like, my perfect movie, I don't know what yours is, like, my favorite movie is, like, Goodfellas.
Forrest Gump.
What's that?
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump, that's a good one, too. Those are my type of movies. I don't really get into sci-fi stuff, but I did go see Star Wars last night, thought it was really, really good. I'm very depressed, though, because there were about a dozen previews of new movies coming out that played. They all are terrible. 10 were sci-fi, completely ridiculous. One was about a girls' volleyball team, and then the other was some new TV show coming to PBS that I like everything PBS does. I won't care. There's nothing I care less about than a PBS program. So that's sad. But the Star Wars movie, Last Jedi, that's great. All right, let's get to the news. Chris Mason, our newsman, lead us away with the news.
All right, first off, NFL news. Starting this weekend, Saturday, we have the Titans facing the Kansas City Chargers and the Falcons taking on the Rams. And then on Sunday, the Bills play the Jaguars and the Panthers take on the Saints for the third time this season.
Wow. Yeah, no, we've got some good games. I think you meant to say Chiefs, but I think you ended up saying Chargers there.
Oh, I had Chargers wrote down, but you're all right, Chiefs. That's why I said that.
Yeah, so we got the Chiefs game. The Chiefs, to me, are a team that I don't think is going to make it very far in the playoff. But I do think they will beat Tennessee this weekend. I just think the Tennessee team has too many holes defensively and is not well coached.
So after we get through the news, I want to get back to this, and maybe we'll get into it after we talk about Clemson. I'm going to disagree with you completely on Clemson, though, and Alabama. I don't know what you're going to say, but I swear, wherever you're going with it,
Okay.
College football. We just talked about it. That it's going to be an all SEC college football national championship. Georgia beat Oklahoma in double overtime, winning 54-48, and Alabama stomped Clemson 24-6. The championship game will take place this Monday night at 8:00.
Yeah, no, that Clemson-Alabama game went just as you predicted last week on the show. You came out and said, listen, Clemson's not going to move the ball down the field. This is going to be a defensive game, and Alabama's going to physically control everything about this game. And I watch it, we're like 5 minutes in, I'm like, crap, he got this one right. Like Clemson, you could tell 5 minutes in, that battle on the line of scrimmage, they couldn't win it. You could tell Alabama's defense was back. That was a big problem.
No, if I remember right, I got both the games right because Georgia, Oklahoma said Georgia was going to win that in a close, high scoring game.
Yeah,
got that one right. So, sports betting account looks a little better today than it did Saturday. Staying in college football in the news, Rich Rodriguez has been fired by the University of Arizona following misconduct allegations. The university said the decision was based on multiple reasons.
This is a big story, and what I think Arizona should and will do is I would go after Lane Kiffin, and I would say here, $6 million a year, come coach Arizona, but we want you here for like 5 years, and come revive this program, because here's the thing. Arizona State just went and hired Herm Edwards, okay? Let me ask you, Herm Edwards versus Lane Kiffin, your kid is a 17-year-old college football recruit. And Lane Kiffin walks in there, and he's young, and he's cool, and he's got his new offense, and he's got his new game plan, and he's got professional connections. And then he leaves, and Herm Edwards walks in, and he's old, he smells weird, says something weirdly, tries to be motivational, but it comes across as just clunky. Where are you telling your kid to go, Arizona or Arizona State?
Hopefully Liz isn't watching, but... Arizona State's notorious for having attractive women go there, so
okay.
it's a little easier to get a 17-year-old kid to go to Arizona State. No, you're right, though. I mean, the recruiting battle's pretty much over at that point.
No, that's why I'd hire Lane Kiffin tomorrow. He brings his offense with him. I think he's great on the recruiting trail. And by the way, I think, I look at USC, and I watched that game with Sam Darnold this past weekend, and everybody's going for Sam Darnold. I'm like, no. Clay Helton's game plan was so bad in that game, and Sam Darnold's running for his life. I think Lane Kiffin knows the weaknesses of USC and would know how to poke them in the ribs and could make you competitive with them really quick. Like, that to me would be a home run hire for Arizona if they could get him.
Finally in the news today is National Chocolate Covered Cherry Day.
Chocolate covered cherry day. Huh. That's interesting. All right, thank you. That was Chris Mason, our big newsman. He comes in with the news. Thank you, Chris.
That's the news.
All right, thank you there, Chris, for the news. Okay, so Clemson played this game against Alabama. I told you a little bit ago, we're 5 minutes into the game, and I mean, seriously, 5 minutes into the game, I threw my hands up. I'm like, this is not going to be a fun game for Clemson. They're going to get curb stomped by Alabama, and that's exactly what happened. And the reason I knew that is because you could tell Alabama was physically on a different level than Clemson was. Okay, here's the problem, though. Alabama didn't have to play in a conference championship game. Clemson absolutely did. Clemson is the number one team in the country. According to these seeds, Clemson's the number one seed. Alabama's the number 4 seed. So we're rewarding Clemson after they won their conference title game, and Alabama didn't have to play in the SEC championship. Alabama ends up getting a bye for not playing the conference championship. Clemson doesn't, and we reward Clemson with playing the most physical team in college football. That absolutely should not have happened. Clemson was beat up in that game. They were sluggish. You could tell. And you could tell Alabama, having that extra week off, allowed their linebackers to come in fully healthy and allowed their defensive line to get healthy and allowed their tight ends to get healthy. They had issues with that a few weeks ago. And you could tell Alabama physically was on a completely different level than Clemson was. That is atrocious to college football. That is an absolute travesty. This is why we need to expand the playoff to not 8 teams. Because if you get it to 8 teams, all you're doing is you're telling the number one team of the country you have to play at this. You're putting them on the same level as everybody else. If you're number 1 and number 2, we should be rewarding you for being ranked that high. Clemson and Oklahoma should have been given byes. And Alabama should have been forced to play the 6th best team in the country, and Georgia should have been forced to play the 5th best team in the country. There was no reason at all for Alabama to play Clemson in that game Monday night, and the reason Alabama won was because they were given an extra week. We literally awarded a team for not being as good as the other team. That is not how college football is supposed to be. This is why I love the BCS system, because I'm like, the BCS system rewards teams that win 99% of their games. It does not reward teams that play weak schedules, and it does not reward teams that have awful losses. That's why I was such a proponent of it. So, every week in the college football season was a grind, and every week there was tension. But now we don't have that same tension because the number 1 seed and the number 4 team in the country is playing at the exact same level. I don't care about expanding the playoff to include more teams. That's not what this is about. I want to expand the playoff to 6 teams so we can reward the 1st and 2nd teams in the country. Because Clemson had to play an unbelievably physical game with Miami in the conference title game. They were beat up after their long stretch at the end of their season. And the reward we give them is a first-round playoff game against Alabama. That's not how this thing should work. The other take I have from this is these bowl games, all of them, with the exception of 2 and then the playoff games, were awful. They were all awful. And I looked this up today. Stadiums during these bowl games were averaging 68% attendance. 68%. That includes, by the way, the Orange Bowl, which was played in Miami and featured Miami. It included the Armed Forces Bowl, which was played in Maryland and featured Navy, who's in Maryland. It also included games in the Bahamas, where a stadium only seats 15,000, and they had 13,000. So that number is even exaggerated from what it should be. These games, though, the attendance should really be closer to 80%. I mean, like, they're bowl games. These should be a much bigger deal than they are. That's why I've said, listen, December 26th, Duke played Northern Illinois in Detroit, Michigan. There is no way I can convince my wife during Christmas time that we need to travel to Detroit, Michigan to go watch a bowl game. It's cold, plane tickets, tickets to the game, food, hotel, all of that comes out to about $1,000. We're not doing that around Christmas time because we're buying gifts for people. And also we're going to be around family during Christmas time. But I tell you when I could convince my wife to spend $1,000 to go watch a football game would be on Labor Day weekend, where we get an extra day off of work. It's warm outside. There hasn't been a lot of, we're all hungry for football because it hasn't been played in months. These games would mean so much more Labor Day weekend. And imagine, Wisconsin, Miami. Instead of that being an end-of-year game, that's a start-of-the-year game. Like, imagine that. Imagine we got a rematch with Clemson and Alabama in the bowl games to start off the year. Like, how great would that be? That would be absolutely incredible. But instead, we get these games at the end of the year filled with empty stadiums. Nobody's going to them. And besides a paycheck for a couple of schools, the game really doesn't mean much. So, I thought this postseason, with the exception of the Georgia-Oklahoma game, which was absolutely phenomenal, one of the best games I've ever seen. With the exception of that, I thought the college football postseason was absolutely abysmal.
No, I agree with you on that. I agree with you on moving all the bowl games to the beginning of the season. But this whole show today has been you avoiding, and not only avoiding, but completely countering the SEC and their dominance. Let's start with the beginning of the show. Georgia, through a great change in the way they were playing football at halftime, came back from a 14-point deficit, turned in overtime, and ended up stymieing the best offense in college football. Then, it can't be Alabama's great. It can't be Clemson was terrible and overranked throughout the entire season. It can't be that. It has to... Besides that, it has to be, Alabama just lucked into it because they weren't as good and got this extra week.
Now, Alabama was great, but Alabama being great at this point, I mean, how long has Saban been great? Like, it's over 10 years. We've got Jordan Holtis in the chat over on Spreaker. He said Saban had a great game plan. I don't disagree with that at all. Saban was absolutely fantastic. Alabama was fantastic. But at this point, Alabama being great is a given. Alabama is almost always great. They were great Saturday. That's why they won it by 21 points. But I'm not going to believe that Alabama is 21 points better than Clemson. I believe it, though, when physically they are in much better shape than Clemson is because Alabama was given a week off that Clemson didn't get.
Alabama, I don't care if they lined up and played again tomorrow. Alabama is going to beat that team by however many points they beat them by or more. They weren't physically matched. Like, they didn't have the same ability by any means. JJ wants us to talk to us. To talk to him on Facebook, though. He wants us to acknowledge him. So, no, the SEC, by far, especially on the top end, I mean, I think you could... I know Auburn lost their bowl game, and that, to me, was kind of... And I'll give them this excuse. I don't like to give teams excuses, but when you play a season where you think you have a chance to win the national championship game, and then you don't make the playoffs and get put in some second-rate bowl that really you don't care to be. Auburn did not care about that game, right?
No, not at all.
South Florida, though.
Central Florida,
excuse me, had something to prove.
Yeah.
They had to win that game.
Well, this is just like Boise State and Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl. When Boise State won, and it's just like Utah and Alabama. I forget what bowl they were playing. I think that was an Orange Bowl several years ago, or a Sugar Bowl a long time ago. Utah ended up winning that game. Like a number of times, oftentimes, in fact, it's more often than not, when we put a mid-major against an elite power in these BCS or New Year's Day games, it's the mid-major that ends up winning it because they've got more to play for than the Alabama, the Oklahoma, whatever. And you saw Central Florida today came out and hung a national championship or national champion banner. I mean, like that to them means everything.
Yep. Yeah. Well, rightfully so, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know as far as extending the playoffs. Like 6 teams to me, especially like how do you determine who gets the number 1 and number 2 seed this year? Oklahoma and Georgia, both of those had argument to be the number 2 or the number.
You're always going to have teams that have arguments.
Yeah,
but I mean, listen, this is where I think conference championships, which I don't believe should be the end-all, be-all, but this is where I think you would give conference championships some leverage. Because Clemson had to play that ACC championship. Alabama did not play in an SEC championship because they couldn't make it in there. Now, I don't think that should deter you from putting Alabama in the playoff, but I think we should at least reward Clemson for having to play that conference championship game. So, I think you can give some leverage to those teams for winning their conference championships, and you can give those the 1 and 2 seeds. But, I mean, you're always going to have arguments no matter who it is. And, I mean, there's going to be a time in the next couple of years where you would much prefer to be the 4 or the 1 seed versus the 2 or the 3, and somebody's going to throw a fit for being this 2 instead of the 1. But I'm telling you, like, Clemson and Oklahoma going into this thing looked like the best teams. Georgia had a huge loss to Auburn, and Alabama didn't play in the SEC championship game. So I would be totally fine if Georgia had to play Wisconsin in a playoff game and Alabama had to play Ohio State. And we gave Clemson and Oklahoma a bye in the playoff.
I wouldn't be down for buys. I mean, you're trying to turn it into like the NFL at that point. I don't know. Doesn't
just
sound
one
right
side
to
of the NFL, but you have to understand. Like at this point, what ticks me off so much about Saban is their schedule every single year is they play one nice neutral site game. They will never travel anywhere, and then the rest of their non-conference schedule features like Utah States, New Mexico States, Wofford's.
No, their schedule is weak this year, especially weak this year outside of Auburn. But they're Alabama and they can do that, and he's Nick Saban and he can do that, right? So other schools don't do that because they can't.
Here's their schedule next year. They'll play Louisville in Orlando, then Arkansas State, UL Lafayette, the Citadel. 2019, and I'm a Duke fan, but come on. They play Duke, not in Duke, in Atlanta, and then they play New Mexico State and Southern Miss. 2020, it's Georgia State and Kent State. 2021, Miami, Florida, in Atlanta, and Mercer. So this is what Nick Saban does. He schedules one nice team in Atlanta, in Orlando, New Orleans, and then he plays the rest of his games against cupcakes at home. He doesn't travel anywhere. That frustrates me. And we're going to reward that versus Clemson's schedule, who has a home and home with Auburn for like the next 6 years. I mean, like Clemson's schedule is a really rigorous schedule. Georgia traveled to Notre Dame. Oklahoma traveled to Ohio State. Like, that to me is the biggest issue with all of this is we used to in college football reward you for being the 1 or 2 best team in the country. Instead, now we're essentially punishing you for playing in a conference championship game.
I don't know that it's necessarily punishment because
you wouldn't say so. I mean,
well, number one, there's a long enough break, right? If it was like the next weekend, I could see some argument.
Well, if we put the bowl games at the start of the following season, I think we can have a 1 week break and then start the playoff.
I agree with that. I don't know why we need all these bowl games.
Yeah.
To me, I would like to see about a 16-team playoff, to be honest with you.
Oh, yuck.
And just have it play out.
Yuck.
But
I think it just threw up in my mouth.
No, I would like to see 16 teams go in there, have it start immediately.
16 teams?
Yeah.
Why in the world do we need Michigan State in this thing? They're right now the 16th team of the country. Or Washington. I watched Washington 3 times this year. There is no reason to put them in the playoff.
You don't think that Washington can line up against Oklahoma and beat them?
No,
I do.
Not at all.
And
Washington's a bunch of 3- and 4-star recruits. Oklahoma's got 12 guys that's going to go play in the NFL.
Look,
Absolutely not.
In a one-game deal, they can win the game.
Oh no. No, Washington, that team's been consistent. They've not been able to get the big win. For years, they've not been able to get the big win.
So that's fine, and maybe they didn't make the playoffs this year. But
I wouldn't want to see Central Florida in the playoff, and I know they beat Auburn. But again, if this is for a chance at the championship game, that is a completely different story.
Penn State could have beat any team in the nation in a given game this year.
Well, I said I thought Penn State was completely underrated going into this thing.
Yeah, but they're ranked 9th. So where do you draw the line and say? And I think the same with, Notre Dame.
Well, listen again. No, Notre Dame again. Every time Notre Dame was tested physically, they got beat.
They have 3 losses, all to ranked teams.
Well, yeah. Again, when they were tested physically, Georgia was more physical than they were. Miami beat them 41-8. They were more physical. Stanford was more physical and dominated that one 38-20. They beat USC, a really nice win at home against Clay Helton, who I think is a year away without Sam Darnold, a year away from getting fired. So, listen, I think 6 teams would be the perfect number to put this out. Clemson and Oklahoma would get byes. Georgia would play Wisconsin. Alabama would play Ohio State. And that, to me, would be an absolutely phenomenal playoff. And let's just say, by the way, and I think we would get another rematch between Alabama and Clemson. So I think Alabama would beat Ohio State. If they got a rematch, the game is different, though. Because Alabama's now coming off a physical game.
It's not going to be different
with Ohio State, and Clemson just got a bye week. That's why all these NFL teams, by the way, are fighting tooth and nail for that first round bye, because you have no idea in a game this physical what a week off means to these teams.
But not coming off 3 or 4 weeks off prior, right? That because once you recover, you only 10 days and you're ready to go again. So once
not all the time. Not if you got a guy with an ankle sprain who's 2 weeks and then day to day.
Well, what injuries did Clemson have where the guys aren't playing? Maybe there are some. I don't know of any.
Well, it's not like they had a slew of injuries. They just had guys that were beat up.
Right, and after a month, they're good to go. Right? They've been off for a month. It's not like they have to turn around after pulling their.
The thing though is I just don't buy that, because we watched that game. Clemson was sluggish.
Clemson was sluggish because they were playing the best team in the nation.
But Clemson's played... Okay, so we saw that best team in the nation play Auburn, right? Auburn physically went toe-to-toe with Alabama. Well, Auburn and Clemson played second week of the season.
Yeah, second week.
Clemson physically went toe-to-toe with Auburn.
But no, that number one, it was second week of the season, and Auburn got way better throughout the season. They did. Auburn looked like crap. And not only that,
what I'm saying is physically, though,
how many points
did
Clemson score in that game? 13 points. Right? 13 points. Right? They're not going to come out and score much more. We're talking about the defenses here of Georgia, Auburn, and Alabama. Those defenses are just dominant. And
here's what Clemson had to do. They had to play Florida State, which I know Florida State was not good, but it was a physical team.
They weren't even close.
Florida State's got a ton of talent on that team. They had to go at South Carolina. Again, SEC team who you said was good. Clemson smoked them. Then they had to play Miami, who I know, again, got smoked in the conference championship by Clemson, but Miami is a super physical team, one of the tallest and biggest teams I've ever seen in college football. Clemson beat them 38-3. Clemson had to play all these physical games. Alabama didn't get hit with those. Alabama had that one game with Auburn. They lost. That was the only tough game they had during that stretch. The only one that physically was tough. Clemson had to play numerous tough games. So, listen, I think you've got to start rewarding the top 2 teams in the country.
I know you want to talk about NFL. So
yeah, now let's move on to NFL. Let's get to our playoff predictions. All right, so do you have the NFL playoff up?
Pulling it up now.
All right, let's get this NFL playoff bracket up, and let's introduce this to you.
I know first you've got the Chargers the Chiefs, and the Titans. That's going to be game 1.
All right, so we've got Chiefs and Titans game 1. I think that one easily is a Chiefs victory.
So let me ask you this before we jump into this. I agree with you. The Chargers victory there. I'm just going to call them Chargers all night. So we've got 8 teams here, all the wild card weekend, and to me, the talent in the NFL doesn't start to play till this next weekend. I mean, you've got some really stout teams that start to play. Talking about the Steelers, the Patriots. I can't think of the fourth team. Vikings,
Saints. So here's
the Eagles. So
Eagles.
like the four teams that are not playing this weekend that are in the playoffs.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Those are the talent of this of the NFL.
Oh
right?
yeah,
I mean
for
those
sure.
are by far the four favorites to win the Super Bowl. But if you could pick one team that's in the playoffs that's not playing or that is playing this weekend, who would it be?
If I could pick one team that is playing this weekend, I think the Saints.
Yep, that's exactly where I
That
was
to me, first off, I've got what I think is the best coach in the NFC because he's super experienced, offensively well versed. I like Sean Payton a lot. I get the more experienced quarterback in the NFC. We know Drew Brees has been around the block. Also, he's way more experienced and mature than Cam Newton. I like that matchup this weekend. I don't trust Matt Ryan with Atlanta. And the Rams, although super talented, feel like they're a year away from me. A year away. So I like the Saints better than anybody right now in the NFC.
The knock on the Saints for years was once you get them outside the dome, they can't play, which was true. But now they've added that Kamara kid, and he can just run all over.
They've got a real running
you.
game.
Yeah.
The defense is finally back. And by the way, it's not like they have to play Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay, so they don't have that. It's not like they're going to have to play Carson Wentz in Philadelphia. They don't have that to worry about. I mean, like literally, the Saints have the best quarterback and the best head coach combination in the NFC. Like, so that historically in the NFL has always been what has worked.
Well, if you just look at the quarterback matchup and you take Drew Brees and compare him to all the quarterbacks that are left, I think he's by far the best quarterback and has the best chance to make it into the playoffs, into the Super Bowl.
No, I completely agree with that. Okay, so let's go. So here's the wild card matchups this weekend. Tennessee, Kansas City. Where do you go with that
We're
one?
both going Kansas City.
Okay, we both go with Kansas City. Buffalo and Jacksonville.
That's probably the toughest matchup. I'm going to give the edge to Buffalo.
Really?
Yeah. And who would have thought that at the beginning of the season we'd be talking about Buffalo and Jacksonville? I don't know.
Yeah, that to me was not a playoff matchup I foresaw either.
I think that's a pretty big upset. I know. I think they're like an 8-point underdog, but especially if I'm getting the line, I'm taking Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm going to take Jacksonville in this one. Listen, I know Blake Bortles isn't very good, but it's not like Tyrod is playing at a B+ level either. Like Tyrod has a lot of mistakes in games, and cannot throw the ball down the field. Jacksonville has a real defense. I mean, they've got men on that field, and Tom Coughlin is the brain behind this engine. That to me is why Jacksonville is playing at the level they are. I actually like Jacksonville a lot this weekend. I think they could win that one by 17+. You said they're an 8-point favorite.
Yeah, it depends on what you're looking at, but Westgate, who's probably the biggest sportsbook in Vegas, has them at 8.5 points.
If I were in Vegas this weekend, I would bet on Jacksonville to cover that.
See,
I get a great defense against that quarterback. I feel like I would take that all day.
I'm looking at this as all these teams are pretty big lines for the NFL. So you've got Kansas City 8.5 points, Rams 6.5 points, Jacksonville's 8.5 points favorite, New Orleans 7. Those are big lines. One of those teams is going to get upset.
Yeah,
like I don't think all four of the favorites are going to win. I mean, perhaps, but you're going to at least see one upset. And if there's one upset to be had, it's going to be the Bills.
All right, so he's taking the Bills this weekend. All right, let's shift over to, let's go now to the divisional round games in the AFC. So now we would have Kansas City against New England in that game. Who would you take in that one?
Kansas City, New England? Oh, definitely. I mean, why are you asking the question?
Well, listen, I think Kansas City has some nice defensive players. I also think they have offensive weapons between Kareem Hunt. They've got a nice receiving core, actually, and Travis Kelce. I think that could actually pose real problems for a New England defense that's been very susceptible this year. But I think New England wins that one somewhere around like 27-20. Also, keep in mind, Andy Reid is a very good coach and knows how to put together a game plan. So it's not like Bill Belichick is getting Bill O'Brien in this one. He's getting a very good coach.
New England was embarrassed week 1.
Well, yeah, no, they were.
And they want Kansas City.
Yeah.
Like, they want to beat
This is a
Kansas
great
City.
point.
So I would take the Patriots to win that game by like 20 plus. I mean, I really
No, that is a great point that they were embarrassed. But I think Kansas City strategically actually matches up really well with them, and that's part of the reason they played so well in week 1.
And New England's defense is playing way better than they were in the first 4 weeks of the
Oh, no,
season.
they are. They definitely are. But I would take New England to win that one, too. Okay, so next one, let's just say Jacksonville wins. Let's say they win.
Okay.
Would you? Because I know. Okay, Bills and Steelers. I'm obviously taking the Steelers. You're obviously taking the Steelers. Jacksonville, Pittsburgh, though. Where do you go on that one?
I don't see any team beating. I don't see either of those teams beating the Steelers.
No?
No, too much talent. And the Steelers were embarrassed by Jacksonville early in the season too.
That's why I think Jacksonville wins it again. Because
Really?
oh yeah, no, I think okay. So today came out. Todd Haley's going to be leaving the team at the end of the year. I think, and I said this a couple weeks ago, there is a big rift between Roethlisberger and Haley. I think that extends to Mike Tomlin as well. And I think Jacksonville's a really well-coached team. Also, we got to keep in mind, this game is going to be in Pittsburgh. And Antonio Brown is not playing. Is he even going to be available for that game? I feel like he's injured.
No, I think he's there.
Maybe find that out. I feel like I saw something today that Antonio Brown would be questionable for the divisional round game. And Jacksonville's got like elite defensive players. So I think Jacksonville, I'm going to pick them to win that game, but I think at least it would be close. But I would take Jacksonville to beat Pittsburgh. So there it is. Antonio Brown to miss, does that say rest of the season?
No, it looks like he's probable.
Okay.
Regular season.
Regular season with partially torn calf. So Antonio Brown's probable. I tell you what, if he misses that game, though, if Antonio Brown's not available, and again, we're playing in Pittsburgh, it's going to be snowy, there's going to be runs. It's not like you're playing a game in Florida. You're going to have like 20 passing attempts max from each quarterback. I would take Jacksonville to win that game.
Well, the Steelers also have one of the best running backs in the league. So.
Oh, no, they do.
Yeah.
They definitely do.
Yeah, I would take the Steelers.
But you have to agree. There's something there to Jacksonville keeping that one close, right?
I have.
I don't
know. I don't know. I would argue against you. I would think the Steelers win that one pretty easily.
Okay, so you take the Steelers.
10 points, maybe 14 points.
All right, now let's go into the conference championship because I think it's obvious if Jacksonville played New England conference championship game, New England would win that one. That one I do think is obvious. Let's go Pittsburgh, New England in the conference championship game. Where would you go with that?
That's tough, man. I think it's a lot tougher than. I mean, look, history tells us that Belichick's going to win that game. Right? I mean, Tomlin has not been able to win the big game against New England. So you'd be like an idiot to bet against them, but I think it's going to be a lot closer this year. Mainly because I think that the Steelers' offense is in a position where they can play against that New England defense and put up a lot of points. So I think I would look for that game to be pretty high scoring in the 30s, both teams to be in the 30s, or at least upper 20s, and it to be like within a touchdown either way. My lean, though, would be New England to win.
Yeah, no, I see your point about this one going high scoring. That's where I definitely would agree with you. I don't think Pittsburgh has any chance to beat New England. I mean, listen, the game's in New England. We saw this last year. New England just smoked them. We saw it earlier in the season. New England was a better coach. Pittsburgh had a complete coaching meltdown and quarterback meltdown late in that game. I think at this point, New England, there's one thing to lose to a team and then play them again, and so you play harder. But there's another thing when a team is just simply inside your head. And I think at this point, the Patriots are just completely inside the Steelers' head. And I think the Patriots are going to win this one again. So I'm picking the Patriots to come out of the AFC. You've got the Patriots also coming out too. Now let's move over to the NFC with the 4-5 matchup this weekend. Carolina and New Orleans in that wild card game. Where would you go with that?
I'm taking New Orleans. It's in the Superdome, you got Drew Brees, Kamara. They're just going to run all over the team. And the Panthers really haven't shown me much this season.
Yeah, no, I'm going to pick Drew Brees in this one too. I do think there is something to the way Carolina is coaching this team. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name too. Carolina's coach. Crap. Regardless, I know he wears the funky glasses. Anyways, I think Carolina's been very well coached this season. I think they have figured out how to limit Cam Newton, and I really like what they've done defensively so far this season. It depends on which Cam shows up, though. If we get Cam, who completes 75% of his passes and has a quarterback rating of 120, Carolina, I think, could and probably does win this game. If we get emotional Cam Newton, who can't complete a 5-yard pass and take shots he shouldn't take, then I'm going to take the Saints to win this one. And I will pick the Saints in this one. 27-20 is about where I see that one going. Let's go to the 3 and the 6, Rams and Falcons. How do you like that matchup?
Ron
Rivera.
Yeah.
He's got the funky glasses, though.
That's probably the most intriguing game to me. You've got a team that's been there and done that, being in the Super Bowl last year. In the Falcons, Matt Ryan, who we disagree with how good he is, but I think he can win a big game.
Yeah.
Versus kind of an unproven Rams team who has played very well this season. Gosh, I'll give it. I think on a neutral field, that game's probably going the Falcons. I'm going to give the Rams the nod, though.
Yeah, listen. I think the Rams are better coached. I think the Rams have a more talented, less experienced, but more talented quarterback. Like Jared Goff throws a beautiful deep ball. Matt Ryan, I don't think, can do that. And this Falcons receiving core was younger last year. They're not as young this year. The Rams have they've got a nice amount of experience, but they've got a lot of youth, so they're young and physical. I think the Rams probably win this one, but I do think this one, like you said, is the most intriguing matchup of the weekend and should be the closest one that we see. All right, so let's go to the 1 and the 4. This would be Eagles and Saints in the divisional round. Where would you go with that pick?
I would definitely give the nod to the Eagles. I can see the Saints winning the game, but I think the Eagles, they're just a little bit too powerful on offense for the Saints to stop them.
There is no way in my mind, none, that Nick Foles beats Drew Brees. And I know people like Drew Peterson. But here's the thing about Drew Peterson. People like to hammer Chip Kelly because of what he did with that team and Nick Foles. But did you watch what the Eagles did this past weekend? They put up a goose egg. Chip Kelly never put up a goose egg in the NFL. So Drew Peterson without Carson Wentz, I don't think is the same coach. So I don't see Drew Peterson and Nick Foles beating out Drew Brees and Sean Payton. So I'm taking the Saints in that one, and I think it could get ugly, even though it's in Philadelphia. And like you said, this is not a Saints team that is dependent on playing in a dome. They can play in bad weather. So Philly, cold game. Saints, I think, will be just fine. All right, let's go to the 3 and the 2. You and I both like the Rams. So Rams and Vikings. Where do you lean on this one? Because to me, I feel like the Vikings have a bit of an edge here.
Oh, I think it's a huge edge. Yeah. I'm taking the Vikings all the way. I don't see how the Rams can go into Minnesota and win that game. Vikings are going to win that, I think, pretty easily, about 2 touchdowns or more.
Yeah, no, this is exactly what I've said about the Vikings. Defensively, that is, in my mind, the best team right now in the NFL. Offensively, they have a great offensive line. They can run the ball. And the quarterback play, I mean, it's not like it's been bad. Case Keenum has shown over the past several weeks he can play in this league. So I like Jared Goff more than Case Keenum, but I don't think Case Keenum brings you down any. I don't think he limits your offense at all. I would take the Vikings to win that one. So I would have a Vikings-Saints conference championship.
Yep.
All right. So
I could easily see it going that way.
Yeah. All right. So let's say if it were Vikings Eagles, where would you go with that one?
Viking. I think the Vikings are going to play in the Super Bowl.
Oh, you think the Vikings are going to the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
I would take the Saints again to beat the Vikings. We've seen these wildcard teams come in and do this before. where they, like the Giants are notorious for this, for going 9-7, then they get into the playoffs and win out. A lot of this at this point is going to be experience. You're going to have everybody in the country watching you. All the pressure is on you in the world, because if you lose that day, you're done for the year. The Saints, I think, know how to handle that. I think they will beat the Vikings in a close one, something like 23-20. All right, so let's go Super Bowl. We both agree on the Patriots. I like the Patriots and Saints to play in the Super Bowl. You like Patriots and Vikings. So let's say Patriots and Vikings. Where would you pick that?
You heard it here first. Minnesota Vikings winning the Super Bowl this year.
Oh, wow.
Minnesota Vikings beating.
I don't know if we've got a David Woodson, one of our listeners, listening tonight. He listens pretty regularly. He's a big Vikings fan, but I'm sure he'll be happy to hear that. Assuming that it does actually pan out. I'm going to take, listen, I think it's going to be the Patriots and the Saints. I'm going to take the Patriots to win this one. I like the Saints a lot. I really do. But at this point, going into the Super Bowl, physically, I think they would be beat up from 3 big NFC games. I think Drew Brees versus Tom Brady. I like Brady more. I like Sean Payton, but I like Bill Belichick more. And the Saints defense, as much as I like it, it's not like it's the top 3 defense in the league. So I don't think they're going to give the Patriots a lot of problems. So I will take the Patriots to repeat as Super Bowl champions. And by the way, immediately following the Super Bowl championship, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick retired together.
Really?
I'm going with that prediction.
We have a listener, Bill Meader. Yeah, I think he's a professional handicapper. He says he's putting all his money on the Skins to win the Super Bowl.
Either he is confusing golf with football again, or he's literally lost his mind because the Redskins aren't doing that. Within the next decade. All right, so there's your playoff predictions. Here's the other thing that happened, by the way. Very exciting story. Jon Gruden this is a 99% chance of him heading back to the NFL as the coach of the Oakland Raiders, soon to be the Las Vegas Raiders. That's exciting. This is going to work. So, first of all, today there's 2 fans that are deeply offended by this. First, there's Tennessee Volunteer fans that are like, oh my gosh, how can you leave us in this dire need where our program is a mess and in shambles? Well, that's why he's not going to take your job, because your program is a mess and in shambles. And then there's Bucs fans who are like, hey, we've got a quarterback here. You used to coach us. We'd love to have you back. Well, first of all, you kind of ran him out of town the last time. And second of all, have you watched Jameis Winston play? He's not exactly what you want as a coach. Jon Gruden looks at the Raiders and sees one of the top 5 offensive lines in the league. He sees Derek Carr, who I know wasn't great this year, but we know what Jared Goff was before he got his coach. We know what Matt Ryan was with Kyle Shanahan. Coaching matters in this league. So if Jon Gruden looks at Derek Carr and is like, hey, I could go in there and mold him, put him into my system, we could go win some games. He's got an elite wide receiver. All you have to do is find ways to put that defense together. And not to mention, by the way, look at the rest of the AFC West. Alex Smith is very limited in what he can do and is on the verge of retirement. The Broncos quarterback situation is an absolute mess. And the Chargers, Phillip Rivers is also on the verge of retirement. So you literally should be the favorite to win that division for the next 5 years. That means he's going to go into Oakland, into the Raiders, and he's going to take that team to the playoffs for the next 5 years, which means his legacy will be cemented as a great coach, not one who was run out of his last gig, and he's going to have a potential to win a Super Bowl. I think that's a fantastic gig for Jon Gruden. Much better than the Tennessee Volunteers and a ton better than Tampa Bay.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, that offense is great. He has a way of connecting with the players in an organization unlike any other coach. And I think that's really what they need there. They've got a good lineup of players and a good offense and can really turn that thing around, I think, quickly.
Agree. Definitely agree. All right, well, good show today. Really good. Appreciate Chris being back on the podcast tonight. Always good to have him around. So, Chris, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
We will be back live next week. It's going to be a really fun show. We will be post college football championship game, which is exciting and sad because it's into the college football season. We'll be in the middle of the NFL playoffs. And also, I've got an interesting story I'm saving for next week about LeBron James. You don't want to miss this. He came out today and said something very interesting. This is the CJ Sweat Show. We'll see you next week.
You like that? You like that?